day talking about and discussing issues concerned with the prevention and safeguarding of children's rights would be complete without a session on legislation and prosecution. We have some distinguished speakers who I hope you're all ready to learn from and allow yourselves to be inspired, and ultimately what we want you to do after this session is, of course, act. Take action. I just have a couple of housekeeping comments. I'm not going to speak for very long. After each of the speakers has had their opportunity to speak, you guys will have the chance to ask questions. We have Her Excellency Huria Mashour and Her Excellency Kamara Sanaba Kaba will be speaking in Arabic and French respectively, so please grab one of these. All right. Channel 1, so you turn it on and then you press the button at the side to select channel 1, that is English. Channel 2 is Arabic, and channel 3 is French. Okay? So on that note, as I mentioned, our first speaker is the Minister for Human Rights in the Yemen. And she's going to specifically talk about her experience of trying to introduce a children's rights law in the Yemen. So what are the challenges that she has faced, and what can we all learn from them? Please give a warm round of applause to Her Excellency Huria Mashour. Sorry.
Thank you very much. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, ladies and gentlemen. At the beginning, I want to speak on my behalf and on behalf of all those who defend the rights of women and children to thank the government of the United Kingdom and those who organized this summit. We are facing a very important and a very grave issue indeed. That is the issue of violating the rights of children and young girls. And those children face a lot of problems in the schools and also in the question of them not being able to play as innocent children in playgrounds and have to carry the burden of being married at an early age. One of the main responsibilities of a government is to protect the rights of its citizens, especially those who are vulnerable. And therefore, if there are no proper legal basis, it is very important for us to realize that it will not be possible for us to speak about the rights of the children. In Yemen, and I'm talking about Yemen, there have been some amendments that have been put on the agenda of the government in 2003, and agreement was reached for making such an amendment. But the issue of defining the minimum age of marriage was faced with some problems, and some activists in the human rights field have brought about pressure in 2009, and in principle the Parliament had agreed to set the minimum age as 18. However, there were some people who were extremists and have opposed the introduction of the law and the passing of this law. But what we have achieved in the way of success is that some of the marriages, early marriages, have been stopped by virtue of the efforts of some neighbors and some community leaders, and to negotiate and to compromise and try and convince some people to stop such early marriages. But let me remind you that we did not have a proper law, and 2 months ago a child aged 12, a girl aged 12, was married, and unfortunately we weren't able to stop this marriage. So this is why I say legislation is important in order to put an end to the violation of children's rights, and this would also make sure that the government safeguards the rights of the children. We have succeeded within our national dialogue conference in putting together the principles that safeguard the human rights in Yemen. And therefore, this legislation that sets the minimum age of marriage at 18 is a quantum leap indeed. But what shocked a lot of the human rights advocates 3 months ago, the law of safe motherhood was approved, and also there were some other issues that were put forward for approval, such as preventing of FGM and minimum age of marriage. Those two were not passed in Parliament, and that was shocking to us. We know that in Yemen there were special provisions to do with the prevention of FGM and also of female circumcision, and unfortunately we are facing a lot of issues because the constitution of the Parliament has not changed since 2003. And the members of parliaments are those very people who have rigid backgrounds and cannot change their mindset. But we are hoping that the civil society organizations will help in pushing forward these new legislation. And I'm looking at the moment at this summit and think that this is a very important coalition on the regional, local and international levels in order to push forward new legislation and to bring about new laws and legislation to stop this practice of early marriage. I shall not talk for very long, and I think I've already spoken enough. So let me reiterate that we are depending on these coalitions that are going to be formed through this summit. And I was very heartened by what Mr. Cameron had said, that we must hold each other's hands and we must bring forward all the outcomes that this summit will achieve in order to succeed. Because if we just keep all the words within these empty halls, we will not be making any push forward. We have to achieve the rights of children and safeguard them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. More proof that, yeah, we have to act. Today's not just going to be memorable just because we're all together under one roof, but it's what we do afterwards that really is going to make the difference. Okay, on to our next speaker, and that is Her Excellency Kamara Sanabakaba. And you are, Excellency, going to talk about Guinea's early and forced marriage legislation. What have been your challenges in implementation? So French is channel 3, remember, Arabic channel 2, and channel 1 is English.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. My name is Kamara Sanabakaba. I'm Minister for Social Action and Promotion of Women and Children in the Guinea. It's a great honor for me to be able to speak to you today during this conference, this international summit on FGM and on the early marriage of children. And but particularly happy to have this conference as this issue is particularly serious in my own country, since the practice of female genital mutilation is still very much in existence. The occurrence of FGM in Guinea is one of the highest in the world. According to statistics delivered by the survey carried out in 2012, 97.9% of girls and women between 15 and 49 years of age have undergone FGM. And it is one of the highest rates in the sub-African region. And it's a practice that it is used no matter what region or ethnic community you are talking about. It's a sad state of affairs, which has led my government to sign a number of international instruments to protect the rights of women and children. and to take concrete action to better address the issue of FGM. In 2000, we introduced a law on reproductive health, which bans the practice of FGM. In 2008, the Children's Code is also allowed us to better protect children, including from FGM. In 2010, we adopted a regulation which was published in the official journal regarding the enforcement of the 2000 Act of Parliament. We also set up a coordination committee bringing together key professionals in order to harmonize our work in this field and to make our intervention more efficient both at regional and national level. We've also set up a special institute for the protection of children and women whose remit is to protect women and children at risk of violence. We also work with partner institutions in the civil society and international organizations, and this has allowed us to reach significant successes, i.e. the adoption of a programming framework, a strategic plan for 2012 to 2016, and the bringing together of 150 professionals from the judiciary and police sector has also led to a better coverage of the problem of FGM and the enforcement of law in this matter. We also work with schools and educational institutions in order to raise awareness about FGM. With regard to FGM-related legislation, I have to point out a few actions or measures which were implemented thanks to a free phone line aimed at women and children at risk of FGM. We also organize different training workshops trying to promote synergies between various professionals, which in 2012 has led to over 10 arrests, and where people were brought to justice. There is one good example of very good collaboration between all practitioners with the arrest in July 2014 of a number of people who had committed FGM. And this was done with sponsorship from the UK. People were arrested and inquiries are underway.
D'accord. Mesdames et messieurs, chers invités.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, Guinea has achieved a number of successes recently in terms of the fight against FGM. We still face a number of challenges when it comes to implementing legislation, however. But we are determined to move forward. Unfortunately, the willpower is lacking, and the influence of religious authorities is also a challenge. However, I'd like to reassure you that the government of Guinea is determined to enforce law, ban FGM, and also I'd like to reassure you that Guinea will be a signatory to the charter which will result from today's summit. And I'd like to use the opportunity to thank the British government very wholeheartedly for the opportunity given to me today.
In the questions. But round of applause, please, for the fact that Guinea is going to be a signatory. Okay, and I apologize to all of our speakers for having to cut you short, but it's so that we can really get to the nitty-gritty and allow people to ask questions. Okay, on to our next speaker, Alison Saunders, who is Director of Public Prosecutions here in the UK. For those who don't know, there has been FGM has been illegal since 1985, but in fact there's only been one prosecution since then, as far as I'm aware. So I think it's good for you to share what the CPS is doing to address this.
Do that, and I'll do it shortly.
Okay.
I'll try. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really privileged to be here for the whole conference, not just for this session, which I think is a great day, and good to see so many people committing to moving the agenda forward. As head of the prosecution service in England and Wales, I'm responsible for prosecutions, and I'm deeply committed to making sure that we prosecute not just FGM but also offences of forced marriage. As you've just heard, we've had legislation outlawing FGM since 1985, so that was the year before the CPS came into being, but until last year no prosecution had ever been brought. Why is that? Well, until the early 2000s, we had no cases investigated by the police which were referred to the Crown Prosecution Service, so it was quite some while before anything was actually referred to us to consider. Recognising that we needed to change this, we held a number of meetings with interested parties, third sector groups, people who had experience of FGM and key agencies, and identified a number of actions which were put into plans both in 2012 and 2013. These looked at ways in which we could strengthen both the reporting, the way in which we investigate cases, and also making sure that prosecutors were aware of the legislation, that it was an offence, and making sure that they were aware of the issues that arise when looking at female genital mutilation. As a result of that, we have now got our first prosecution on the books, and we await the result of that case. It hasn't yet come before the court to be tried. It's worth explaining that we only consider cases of FGM that have been referred by the police following an investigation. So it's absolutely vital that we work together with the police to help them with investigations and to make sure that cases are being referred to us. We now have lead CPS prosecutors in each of our areas, and we have signed protocols with each police force across the 42 police forces in England and Wales, setting out the arrangements for both investigation and prosecution of FGM. We've also agreed a joint FGM training plan with the police, and we have started this month running joint training on FGM and forced marriage, which will run through until December. And this has been informed by us reviewing previous cases, finding out the sorts of issues we've looked at, talking to third sector organisations, and making sure that we address all those issues in the training. We also have guidance which is available on our website for prosecutors, which sets out some of the issues that they might face and some of the things that they need to consider when dealing with possible cases of FGM, and making sure that we are being as proactive as we possibly can do. The one thing I can say is the lack of prosecutions has not been through any unwillingness by prosecutors or investigators to deal with these cases. We recognise that it's really difficult for victims to come forward and report these offences. It means that they are having normally to report on their parents or their families, and they may not want to do that with the consequences that that may have for their families. So we need to do everything that we can to encourage victims to come forward. So in February of this year, I wrote to ministers identifying a number of ways in which we thought we could strengthen the laws on FGM, and I'm really encouraged and pleased to hear some of those have been announced as being proposals that have been taken forward today. So things like extending the scope of extraterritorial offences so that those with temporary residency status in the UK also come within the laws and are covered. Parental liability, you've heard about that today, placing a positive duty on parents or carers to prevent their child from suffering FGM at the instigation of themselves or another, and also placing positive duty on medical health care professionals to report FGM, because again we know that there's reporting of child abuse, and FGM is in effect child abuse. And a really important one, I think, is the anonymity for victims, which again is being taken forward. So we really welcome the announcements today, and we'll be working with the police to really help investigate and prosecute more, albeit it would be better to prevent, I think, than prosecute. Thank you.
Well done, Alison. Thank you very much. Yeah, if it gets this bad, then you know you're in trouble. Okay. All right. No, thank you very much for sharing that. Our first NGO panelist, Kranti Chinnappa, Executive Director of Human Rights Law Network in India. You're going to talk to us about how you use public interest litigation to really drive nationwide legislation on this issue.
I'd like to thank the organizers for having us over. And what I'm looking forward to, half of the day has been very productive. We've got to learn a lot, and I'm hoping that the remaining part of the day would be equally enriching, and we'd be able to feed it into litigation that is currently pending at the superior courts in India. When we decided to take up the issue of combating child marriages in India, we found ourselves facing three basic challenges. One was that the law was bad because it allowed, in a very tactic manner, allowed child marriages. Subsequently, the laws did change because of the superior courts spurring the central government to amend its laws. Then we found the law to be inadequate with a lot of loopholes because there was no prosecution for the government officers in preventing child marriages from happening, and also that nobody was really implementing the law. What happened was a collective effort of organizations that work on combating child marriages and a team of lawyers that chose to approach the superior courts in India, reiterating to the courts, basically asking the courts to take the lead in the matter because the executive and the legislature was found wanting in combating the issue of child marriage. The notion of approaching the courts to take lead in a matter is not really new. It's around 2 decades old in the country, which we refer to as public interest litigations. It's slightly different from the Western jurisprudence where a collective of people or somebody on behalf of the collective of people can approach the court. So the bar on locus is different. You'd allow anybody to come to court because the marginalized or the voiceless cannot really reach the courtroom. What this case did, which was filed in around 2003 and is still pending with the courts, was that it first put the government on notice that they needed to get their act together on the legislation. The government did come out with a new legislation, which is of 2006. We won't say that the legislation is adequate, but it was a big leap from where the government stood. It effectively empowered courts to grant injunctions against child marriages if somebody did approach the court. It also gave the option to either of the party who's got married, the minor, if it happened to be a minor, to approach the court to have the marriage set aside, to nullify the marriage, and also grant them compensation as maintenance till they chose to remarry. What the courts also did is that what's lacking in the present law is that it doesn't hold any of the officers accountable for the implementation of the law. So the courts put all the local police officers on notice that they would be responsible for ensuring that the law gets implemented. And for all incidents of child marriages that have been happening since 2005, the state and the National Human Rights Commissions have been asked to investigate on their own and file reports with the Superior Court as a Supreme Court. The few learnings that we've come across in the last decade as this matter is pending is that along with challenging the implementation of the law or the non-implementation of the law on child marriages, we also chose to approach the court on various aspects that lead to child marriage or would result from child marriage. So there's a series of litigation on reproductive rights and access to health services that are pending in various superior courts across the country. Similarly, the right to education, which is a recent legislation, though the law recognizes children to be at the age of 18, the right to education allows you a free education only up to the age of 14. So what we've done is we've challenged that legislation, saying that you cannot cut off legislation at grade 8. It needs to go up to the whole of high school. And in effect, we hope, and we've tied it up with the incidence of child marriages, saying that in effect what you do is you take away the screening or the networking that will allow you to have access to children who might get married before the legal age. And the courts issued notice to all the governments in the federal structure, the central and the state governments. The other thing that we have done is, and I think that's an interesting model, is to try and take when you file a petition is to bring about to take on all government departments together. Because what it forces them to do is, what our learning is, because they file contrary affidavits in court, you realize that they're not coordinating, and then the force eggs them on to coordinate between themselves. We also take up litigation at various forums, so at the superior courts as well as the lower courts. So you ensure that there is also an inbuilt training that's happening of even the judiciary. What we haven't done, and I think what we're going to take back with us, is that a lot of the education of even the judiciary happens both inside and outside the courtroom. On our litigation on child marriages, we haven't really brought forward survivors of child marriages to the courtroom, but I think that's one learning, that it's a very strong method of doing it. I think that's something we're going to do now.
Thank you. Round of applause, please. Okay, and our final panelist is Dr. Tabinder Sarosh. Are you based in Pakistan? Okay, as well. Okay, and Dr. Sarosh is going to talk to us about the limits of law. I mean, it's all very well having legislation, but how do you communicate it to the people? How do they learn how to claim for their own rights? So, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. I think it's only appropriate that I get to speak in the end, because my point over here is that legislations alone are never going to be enough. So I represent Shirkatgah. It's a Pakistani women's rights organization, and we've been advocating for gender-just laws and policies for more than 30 years. And we've been giving legal aid representation programs for women for more than 15 years. However, we feel that no matter how well crafted the laws are, they're never going to be effective when nobody knows about them, when there are procedural obstacles in accessing the services that come with the laws, and thirdly, if harmful practices are embedded in the cultural practices that are the norm in my country. This is especially true for early age marriage, because the legislation that prohibits marriage under 16 years of age has been in Pakistan for more than 50 years. And recently, after devolution, the province of Sindh has just passed a legislation which standardizes the age of marriage to 18. And now the challenge ahead is implementation. So we believe that to be effective, legal reform needs to be accompanied by grassroots interventions that actually aim to overturn cultural practices and the patriarchal mindsets of the community to empower women and girls to access services and claim their rights. At Shirkatgah, besides giving legal advice and referral services and assistance, we actually aim to develop leadership and the self-confidence among women and girls to access services and to actually make the implementation of law practical reality. So here I would just like to discuss a few points that we feel have worked for us, and since this is a forum for sharing, it would be very nice if you guys can come up with more suggestions and questions. So the first thing that really worked for us was a collection and collation of data from evidence on which we based our advocacy campaigns. We carried out a 2-year-long research to track MDG5 in Pakistan, and one of the focus areas was adolescent reproductive health and linking secondary education with the positive reproductive health outcomes. Later on, to extract details, we actually did research on early marriage alone and explored the power dynamics around the decision of marriage. And just a little bit earlier than we had actually developed a position paper, and that position thematic encompassed the legal, health, socioeconomic, and the international commitments aspects of early age marriage. And I think together all these things went a long way in the legislation of the law in Sindh that was passed just earlier this year. Secondly, we feel that communication and modalities need to be very customized to our audience, who are opinion setters, decision makers, women, girls themselves, and at the meso level where formal and non-formal structures coexist, and non-formal structures actually take precedence over the formal ones. So the non-formal laws and the customs actually take precedence. That's where the interventions need to be aimed, and that's where women and girls are subjected to the most immediate control over their lives. We also feel that it's not simply enough to communicate messages. Changing daily practices, overturning traditions needs face-to-face interaction with girls, giving them a space to generate a discourse, to map their own situation and collectively come up with a solution. And one of the best settings for such interventions for us has been our women-friendly spaces. In our women-friendly spaces, girls feel free to come out, speak about their problems, and look for solutions. Lastly, because I'm getting the finger.
It's so bad, I'm sorry.
It's fine. Lastly, the youth, the male youth that are in the catchment of the areas where we work, we feel they have been most cooperative. They have the energy, they have the passion, and they're more ready to work on the girls' agenda because they themselves rank very low in the power dynamics of the society. So they have been one of our best allies. Last thing that I really want to mention over here is that the religious obstacles. Just before the early age marriage law was about to be passed in Sindh, the Council of Islamic Ideology came up with a very outrageous statement saying that even prepubescent marriages and polygamy are acceptable in Islam. And that for us was a breaking point. At that time, we were ready with a short 2-minute documentary, and we were able to leverage the media buzz and get it run on one of the largest media networks in Pakistan with a viewership of 1 million, and it was taken up. So for people like us who are working, we should be ready with our advocacy messages, we should be ready with our tools, and we should have those means to actually get to the basic of the problem, no matter how many laws we are going to pass. And Pakistan is a very heavily legislated state, you know, but if we pass laws and we have no means to actually implement them, yes, I can see you. So that's about it. Thank you so much.
Very passionate presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarosh. Okay, guys, this is your opportunity. Now, we have a wealth of knowledge and experience on this stage, so please, this is for questions, not a little soapbox moment. I love soapboxes, as any Nigerian would, but this is not the moment. Okay, first of all, a question right here. Thank you.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. I'm going to talk in French. I'd like to address this to all the panelists. The last speaker spoke about one aspect of law which is really important. I agree with her that you have to say that you have to address how men live as well. All communication work, all awareness raising must go hand in hand with legal changes. When the last speaker spoke about the law in her country, and I'd like to ask, what about the arrests we've seen? Has there been any reaction on the part of the general public or the media in reaction to these arrests? Have there been arrests, in fact?
Great question. What is the response? Once there is a prosecution and there is an arrest, what's the result? Does that change society?
That happens to be the dilemma. I think one of the first things that needs to be addressed is the information dissemination policy around the laws, because as I told you, people don't know about the laws. In our experience, in Shirkat Gha's experience, when the Women Harassment Act was passed in Pakistan, even the judiciary at the district level was not informed at the right time, and so the training of the judiciary was also one of the agendas that we were following. So far, yes, there have not been cases. However, when we have disseminated the information within the community, only within the last 6 months we were able to block 50 marriages, which were taking place before the age of 18. So it was the public reaction that was more easy to come by, and the public response, I feel, was more prompt. However, the laws and the implementation have always been, historically, they have been very slow, because the entire procedure, rules of business are formed once the laws are formed, and then district committees are formed. And what we the CSOs are trying to do is that more responsible and proactive citizens get to be on those committees, and the information gets to the right holders at the right time so that they can access services. But so far, it's been a very slow process.
And the same response, just for Minister Kaba, in Guinea, for instance, have arrests actually impacted change or resulted in change?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We trained 150 lawyers and also police representatives to be able to do this work, and they have arrested guilty people, and we have even arrested an old lady of 86 who had taken a child from school to operate upon her. And she was intercepted and she was taken to court where she was found guilty and sentenced. So today, people in our country know that you will be punished if you carry out this kind of act. And during the holidays, winter is a good time in our country, the right time for being aware of the risk of this happening, because school children, school girls, are particularly at risk, and we're doing our awareness campaign among these girls. So this is something that's ongoing in Guinea, and we're investing considerable resources in it.
Jackie, I'm a child protection nurse in Bristol, and I've sort of got a two-edged question for Alison. One is, how do we make sure things aren't London-centric and they're actually passed out to the rest of us, because we've got a whole of England and Wales, as you cover. The second bit is the mandatory reporting. How are we going to get through the threshold barriers and some of the barriers that we have? Because I know that the health professionals in my area are reporting, but it's not reaching the threshold for social care, so it doesn't get through to the police, so it won't get to you. So how do we bridge that gap and fill that social care barrier?
Yeah.
Thank you.
In relation to the how do we make sure it's not London-centric, really good point. That's why we were very keen in making sure that we signed our protocols across all 42 police force areas. Took some longer than others, but we've got there and everyone is signed up now, and the prosecutors who are trained and who are leading on this are spread across the areas, and we have a monthly phone call with them to make sure that we are being proactive, we are doing things, we're taking it out. So I think it's a really important point. The reporting and how it gets through the barriers is, I think, even more difficult, actually. We don't know yet the detail. There will be consultation on what's going to happen, and I think it will be really important to feed some of those points into the consultation, because we do need to make sure, and I've heard certainly of sort of some reports that have never got through to the police or never been taken up, so there's no point having it if nothing happens. So feed it into the consultation, please.
Okay, thanks. And a question here.
Yeah, hello. I'm from the African Union Commission, and I have a question for the doctor from Pakistan. Sorry. One of the things which we recently did at the AU, we launched our campaign to end child marriage in May, just this past May. And we look at it from, it's a very complex issue, which involves health, culture, education, and so on. And one of the things which I wanted to ask you, one of the angles which we also look at it is the role of the family, which is very important. And I wanted to ask you, in Pakistan, did you have also, when it came to targeting the people at the grassroots, sensitizing or educating families in terms of valuing their girl children, in terms of protecting their girl children and valuing them, and for them to recognize that this is harming those girls rather than helping them? And I know it's deep-rooted in cultures and traditions, but I think it takes some, education and sensitization, to show them.
Okay, are there any education programs for parents in the Yemen?
Yemen?
Oh, I'm sorry, Pakistan. So Dr. Sarosh, I thought it was for
it's fine. Global citizenship. I actually 100% agree with you. Any intervention that is just aimed at girls and women is never going to be enough, because family is the ultimate body in which decisions are made, in which powers are divested at different levels, you know, and the do's and don'ts are decided. So I brought a few testimonies from actually the women from women-friendly spaces and the men that we were interacting with, and where men have actually come out and said that we have stopped beating our children, and brothers have come out and said that we actually asked our parents to stop the child marriage of a girl. But for that, you know, a capacity building at a different level is very important, because when we look at adolescent girls, we're not just teaching them self-confidence, we're not just teaching them, self-reliance, but also critical thinking and a sense of being a right holder. You know, that I think in our country, in our context, is missing. A girl does not feel that she's a citizen of a country, and she's as much, as much entitled to the rights and the facilities and the services provided by the state. So that needs to come out. And yes, of course, with that, what we need is a circle of allies around her. The mother herself, the woman herself, you know, women are often the best allies, you know, and for them, also the grassroots service providers of reproductive health, like lady health workers that go from house to house, they have also turned out to be great allies. But once again, I am going to emphasize that women, that male youth have been our staunch supporters. They've been energetic, they've been passionate, they've been running independent campaigns, and they are the ones who work as messengers within the families also. They work as allies for tilting the opinion and the decisions of the family. So yeah, that I agree with you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarosh. One more question from the back, and then I'll come back up front.
I wanted to ask the Director of Public Prosecution a question. I'm looking at securing the channels of communication and the information that we receive to enhance prosecution. In April this year, I am from Kenya. I am head of the Anti-FGM Prosecution Unit in Kenya. The Director of Public Prosecution in Kenya launched this unit in April, and we've done something quite unorthodox. We've gone out of the box as prosecutors and met the people and done civic education with regards to the Act. We are at the point of prosecution, having about 7 cases right now prosecuting in court. Now, when we talk about the threshold of evidence and securing the information that we receive, could you share maybe some interventions to secure and strengthen the channels of communication and securing evidence?
Victims to come forward and the sorts of things that we've been doing. I mean, we on a general basis, not just on FGM, but on a general basis, when we're looking at how we might support victims to come forward and give evidence, we've got a number of measures. So things like they don't have to come to court, they can give video-linked evidence from outside the courtroom, and some places that's outside the court building indeed. If they have screens, they don't have to see the offender or anybody else in the court. The anonymity provision, I think, that's been announced by government today is really important, because people don't want to be identified. We already have it for sexual offences, so why would somebody who has been FGM'd coming forward want their anonymity sort of not there? So that's really important. And we also now have currently a pilot going on where we are video recording children or vulnerable adults before the trial, and that's cross-examination and examination in chief, all being done before the trial outside the courtroom. And again, that's, I think, proving to be extremely helpful. So those sorts of things we can do to help vulnerable adults or children come forward. But what's really important as well is the support they get from other organisations such as Refuge, independent sexual or domestic violence advisors, so third sector organisations who really help and support them through the process. And again, that's really important.
Before I come back up to the front, I have here Detective Chief Superintendent Keith Niven of the Sexual Offences Unit at the Metropolitan Police, who has a question.
Hi there. It's for the doctor. If a UK child, or any child, is taken to Pakistan and forced into marriage, is there a liaison and a mechanism to inform the authorities in the UK when you discover that?
To the best of my knowledge, there is, but I don't know how effective that is. At Shirkatgah also, we have been contacted by many human rights organizations in England that have told us about such a situation, and we've tried to track down those girls. However, I do believe that it's a very difficult thing. Officially on paper, yes, Pakistan was a part of the, big post-colonial Commonwealth countries, but I'm not sure how effective it has been, very frankly. I don't. Yeah.
Yes. Hold on a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I believe in third time lucky. Actually, I was unsuccessful at the session this morning at the Prime Minister. This for me is actually quite significant because I'm pursuing a legal career as well. I want to do. But my question is, my name is Salia. I'm a survivor of honour-based abuse, which is often a precipitating factor for forced marriage. And I have a disability. I'm blind. And I escaped 3 times, and I went back to my situation because there was no legislation, or there's nothing available for people with disabilities, although statistics show that women with disabilities are 3 times more likely to experience domestic violence. There's no kind of legislation or nothing in place to protect them. So my question is for Alison, how can legislation, or what can be put into place to protect people with disabilities who are at risk of this abuse?
Thank you.
The legislation, will protect disabled people as well as able-bodied people now. So if you've been assaulted, or if there's FGM law applies as well. So it applies in just the same way. We have just recently issued for consultation a new domestic violence policy, and we specifically highlighted particular issues for groups that prosecutors needed to be aware of, because they need to make sure that they're aware of all the issues either that may affect the circumstances or may affect the way in which we need to help you give evidence. And the domestic violence policy specifically highlights some groups, so that should help as well in some of the issues that you raise. But there's no reason why the law doesn't apply to you as much as it does to anybody else, absolutely.
Thanks. Question here.
Thank you. My name is Margaret Lesuda, the Education Councillor at the Kenya High Commission. Mine is a concern directed to Dr. Tabinda. And I'm happy that you've talked about interventions. Recently in Kenya, we saw so many women going to big meetings and saying that they must be cut. And it brought a lot of questions. I think maybe you didn't watch in the media. It brought a lot of questions as to the level at which legislation is being made. There is a feeling among many communities that they are left out and things are being imposed on them. And I think this is a wake-up call. Possibly you could comment on this as to whether we need to start from the ground, to plant the seed from the ground rather than bring a whole tree and plant in a community and tell them it's bad while they grew up with it. Thank you.
That's so true. I think that is what I had reiterated in my presentation again and again, because laws are made at a higher level, whereas these actions are taking place on the ground at the grassroots level. So the change in mindset and the acceptability of legislation, because I think the problem over here is that many people, when they own it as a part of culture, as a part of tradition, then they're always on the defensive also. They try to defend such traditions on the pretext of culture. So the change definitely needs to come from the grassroots and create a need for the law that will be accepted and that will be actually taken up at different levels. What's the use of a law that is never actually utilized? And when women actually don't go to courts, when girls don't go to services. For example, in Pakistan, it's even hard for a girl to register a complaint. Just to register an FIR, the first incident report, is an issue that bears a lot of stigma for a girl. So I 100% agree with what you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Dr. Aisha Gill. I'm a criminologist at the University of Roehampton. Alison, I just wish to probe a little about the police protocols in pursuing forced marriage and female genital mutilation. I just wanted to get a sense from your point of view in terms of what you think are the key protocols with regards to securing prosecution, particularly in light of the fact that there have been cases where there has been high levels of attrition and withdrawal? And furthermore, do you have a view of the Ministry of Justice announcement today with regards to introducing civil protection orders in terms of addressing female genital mutilation? Thank you.
The protocols address right from the beginning, making sure that we've got early intervention, making sure that we're looking at, because one of the things that we realise is if we wait for a victim to come through the door, we might be waiting for a very long time, and we have been waiting for a very long time. So it's around making sure that we're being proactive, that the police investigations are proactive. So we've heard about the police going to visit airports when there are flights going out to certain countries at certain times of year where we know people may be taken out for FGM. And making sure that there's early advice so that we can give the advice about what would be a good line of investigation, what the evidence is that we're likely to need. So that's what the protocol addresses, making sure that we've got all those lines of communications there, making sure we have the support in place for victims as well, that we understand which organisations can help them and support them. In relation to the prevention orders, I think they're a really good idea. It depends on the circumstances. If you can use. Can you just spell that out? What would that prevention order entail? Well, it's around either stopping. It's a bit like the sort of forced marriage prevention orders, which mean you stop people leaving the country, so you stop the forced marriage taking place. Again, if you know about FGM or the risk of it, you can stop it taking place. So, and again, as I said before, you know, actually, if we can prevent it, it's far better than prosecuting. So, I think it's a really good idea.
Thanks. A couple more from the front. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Khabar Mumtaz. I'm from Pakistan, National Commission on the Status of Women. I was just thinking throughout this morning and even now that when we're talking about specific issues of FGM or forced marriages, we have to look at the other aspects of violence against women, because this is also an aspect of violence against women rooted in cultural practices and tradition. And unless we also look at them holistically, and I thought the Indian example is very interesting, to be able to name a whole range of departments, to be able to get a coordination and coordinated response was an extremely interesting example. And I'm wondering whether in India, because these days rape laws are being debated a lot, unless we look at violence as a phenomena within which this is a very specific cases, these two, how can we isolate them from the others, is my question to anyone who can answer.
Yeah, it's a great question. Perhaps let's bring in the minister, Yemeni minister. Why is there this focus only on, I shouldn't say necessarily only, but why is there a focus on FGM and CEFM as opposed to other examples of violence against women and girls?
In fact, we should talk about violence against vulnerable people, and children are the most vulnerable. Therefore, we must concentrate on their rights. Children are helpless. They are in the hands of their parents. So when the children are unable to protect themselves and the families are unable to protect them, the government here and the state intervenes. And for example, if the parents are the ones who take the decision to harm the children, the state intervenes in the form of introducing legislation and some protective orders. This is the way I can answer that question.
Here, I believe.
The question.
Oh, great, I like the combination.
Okay. I think for me, this issue of genital mutilation is a very serious matter. While it is okay to have the laws in place, and not everything that is legal is just. So I would like to state that we must have a carrot and stick policy in approaching this vice. What arrangements have we put in place? For example, I don't know who is going to answer that question, but I think anybody who can attempt to answer it, to make sure that there are incentives for those people involved into cutting these girls. Secondly, on the issue of making sure that the girls remain at school. You see, there is a problem of girls going to school, but the completion rates come down. What measures do you put in place to make sure these children go to school and stay there?
Okay, great question. Do we need more of a pragmatic approach? And let's start talking about incentives. Who wants to take that briefly? Because I'd like to squeeze in just 2 more questions if possible. No, okay, Dr. Sarosh.
From what I understood, you're talking about practical measures for girls to actually take up services like education and how they stand up. I think it has to begin with girls themselves. Plus, what another model that we have working at the district level is of district advocacy groups that we've made, in which we have actually brought the women and girls face to face with the various stakeholders, decision makers in the district level. So that kind of actually boosts their confidence and increases the community accountability of the duty bearers themselves. So building capacity at one hand, and at the same time linking them up with the service providers at the meso level that are going to give them. But as far as incentives are concerned, that is more of a service delivery sort of an approach. And yes, many people are also doing that. There are many schools that are, and you just heard Malala also talking about education and girls taking up education. But I do believe that is another approach. But I think what's more important is to link, there is a sense of unapproachability. Government cannot be approached by common girls, by common women. So that barrier needs to come down. That gap between the citizen and the state needs to be minimized. And once that is done, girls will feel more comfortable speaking up for their rights, demanding their rights, and claiming their rights.
Okay, do we have time, Will, for one more? Yeah, okay, great. That's too much of a hesitation. Will, let's go for it. Go for it.
Okay, thank you very much. My question or my concern goes to Her Excellency Horia, Yemen. Better registration calls for availability of information. And the case of Africa, where I come from, I'm a member of parliament, Uganda, you find that members of parliament don't have enough time to look for information. How does your parliament work with people who have information so as to be able to make good laws? And then Pakistan.
I think we have time just for the one. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As far as the parliament is concerned, we were the ones who put down this information. We had a lot of research which we undertook, and we said to the parliament that there mustn't be a mix-up of all those matters. So all the centers of education of women and women's studies in Sana'a and other parts of Yemen, we were able to go through to those religious leaders, and the religious leaders did, in fact, support us. And they started to spread the message. So through these efforts, we provided the information. And at the same time, we used doctors, the medical framework, because they are the ones who receive the reports on all those practices, the number of cases of FGM and the circumcision, female circumcision. So we submitted this information, and therefore in 2009, as a result of all these statistics and information, we persuaded Parliament to approve this law on the minimum age for marriage. But there are, of course, some of the people who are reservists, and they stood in the way of promulgating this law, in spite of the numerous facts that were submitted and the numerous numbers of those people who were affected by those practices which were so nefarious to children. Thank you.
I apologize for all of those who wanted questions. You can hear the chatter in the hallway. There are more sessions on the way. Thank you for your patience, especially for the twins down here. How old are they? How old are they? 7 weeks old, and they stayed quiet through the whole thing. So please head to the next session, and please, if you have further questions. Round of applause, please.